Hop on. Okay, so welcome everyone. My name is Katie Darr. I chair the U.S. Biosphere Network's Communications Committee, and I'm the coordinator of the Champlain Adirondack Biosphere Network. Welcome to our latest installment of Biosphere Bites, the U.S. Biosphere Network's bi-weekly 30-minute seminar series that's highlighting the great work being done by biosphere regions towards the Sustainable Development Goals. As a reminder, these talks are recorded and will be posted on the U.S. Biosphere Network's YouTube page for later viewing. And some Zoom housekeeping, please keep yourself on mute if you're not presenting or asking a question during the Q&A. There will be time for discussion following Chris's talk, so feel free to put questions in the chat as they might arise during the talk, or save them for the live Q&A. I'd also welcome folks to introduce themselves and what biosphere region they're tuning in from in the chat. That's all the housekeeping I have, but now I'd like to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Chris Groves. He's a professor of hydrogeology at Western Kentucky University and serves on the Mammoth Cave Biosphere Region Advisory Council. And he's worked on UNESCO science and conservation programs since 1995 with a focus on water resources in China. And very exciting, in 2017, he received China's International Science and Technology Cooperation Award. So we're thrilled to have him here today to speak with us about synergy and diplomacy in UNESCO's science and conservation programs. Chris, take it away.
Right. Yeah, thank you very much, Katie. So I'll just go ahead right to the presentation. Okay, can you see that okay? Is that PowerPoint showing up? Just to make sure.
Not
okay,
in we're seeing the full
right,
all of your slides as well. But...
Okay, how's that look? Okay.
Yep, that's better. Thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, well, thank you very much. I definitely appreciate the opportunity. I want to so Mammoth Cave, it's kind of my own biosphere reserve, I guess, has been kind of involved in the Biosphere Program for decades, really. And so I just really am very appreciative of Cliff McCready, John Allen, Kelly Ceriallo, really just the health and the blossoming of this organization is just wonderful. Also in Mammoth Cave, I want to acknowledge Barclay Trimble, who I see on the phone here, the superintendent of Mammoth Cave National Park, and I'm very appreciative of our relationship with Barclay in the park. Also Rick Toomey, who is our principal liaison. He's the cave resource specialist for the park. So I am I make my day job as a egghead professor, and in fact, it works out. I'm in a classroom with 19 of my closest friends here in a course that we're offering with the collaboration of Mammoth Cave National Park on what's called karst hydrogeology, water and karst landscapes. The word karst, just in case most people have not heard of it, K-A-R-S-T, you'll be hearing about, is a word that describes these kinds of landscapes where we have caves, sinkholes, underground rivers, big springs. These are called karst landscapes. So I work at Western Kentucky University, and just really, up the road happily, just about 35 minutes from here, is Mammoth Cave National Park. And as you can see here, and something that very much influences or informs this particular discussion is that Mammoth Cave is both a World Heritage Site and an International Biosphere Reserve. So what I'm talking about today is the potential for synergy between different UNESCO conservation and science programs, and how that's played out in my lifetime. So there we are. Okay, so I want to start with we'll go into Mammoth Cave here for a little geology lesson. The geology is not the thing here. The important thing, the lesson is. Okay, so just bear with me for a moment. So this is a place kind of way back in the cave somewhere, and you notice here. So it's all limestone, for the most part. But you see these little kind of blobs of some sort of rock sticking out here. That's something called chert, which is a different mineral. It's made of silica, so it doesn't dissolve very well. So we see it, sticking out of the walls sometimes. And the reason I'm mentioning it here is An idea that, very much informs my thinking is I was in college, way back in the day, and we were talking about chert one day. The teacher was, and this is a long time ago, and I'm sure whatever details have been worked out by now. But he said, there's still things about chert that we don't understand, about complexities, about its formation. And I was like, okay, that's fine. So anyway, some years go by, and I'm now in graduate school in another class, a geochemistry class. And the teacher is saying, well, we're talking about the chemistry of the ocean and, this element, that element. And the teacher says one thing that's a little bit of a mystery is silica. If we measure all the silica running off to the sea and we measure how much is in the ocean, they don't match. There's some missing silica somewhere. And this little light bulb, in my head goes up where in one group is saying, where's all the silica going? The other group is saying, how are these silicate minerals forming? And, whatever the details, I thought the answer to this is just getting the right two guys at the right cocktail party, just the communication. As I'll go into, that's what, in my opinion, UNESCO is about. It's getting the right, or, at least in large part, it's getting the right people together, to instill, some amount of synergy. So, we're all, have some idea what UNESCO is on the, among our sort of biosphere group here. But I'll highlight education, science, and culture. And I'm focusing here on the scientific, and this is the headquarters in Paris, France. So whenever I'm doing any of this, whether it's MAB, or Man in the Biosphere, World Heritage, other programs, I'm always very, very mindful of what is the fundamental mission of UNESCO. So we can think about it kind of going right back to the beginning, where in 1945, a war ended where more than 50,000 people had died. A group got together, some diplomats got together in London, had this meeting and said, actually, I don't know if this is in your way. Let me get this out. Move it down there. So they said, they basically just shook their heads and say, what can we do for this not ever to happen again? And one of the answers was, not advancing. Oh, there we go. Yeah, so one of the answers is we create some systems by which the world's people can better understand one another and the world around them. Wars come from misunderstanding or mistrust. So for the world's people to better understand one another and the world around them. So UNESCO was born. Okay, this is from the Constitution. Since wars, and in fact, I was very gratified, Sarah and Tom talked about this 2 weeks ago, since wars begin in the minds of men and women, but this is still the language today, so that's what I used. After 22 updates, it says, men are behind all this. It is in the minds of men that defenses of peace must be constructed. Okay, that was the beginning of UNESCO, to have people understand one another and the world around them. So of all the things UNESCO does, one thing that's kind of the glue that binds, our interests together is that there are programs to protect many of the world's most both cultural and natural places through several different programs. And that's what I'll mention. Now, back to the word karst. Again, these are places with caves, sinkholes, underground rivers, et cetera, having to do with the solubility of the bedrock. And so there are many karst landscapes, karst systems in the world that are protected by UNESCO programs, and I'll talk about what those are. But right now, as of now, there are UNESCO protected areas, biosphere reserves, World Heritage Sites, Geoparks, et cetera, in 86 countries, and of course, including here in Kentucky. So these are the main programs that somehow have that are somehow related to karst landscapes. And of course, Man, the Biosphere, and World Heritage. We can see that at Mammoth Cave. Global Geoparks. I'll be talking quite a bit about something called the International Geoscience Program, which is, I've been involved in a long time and is part of this energy. I'll explain why it sort of looks like it should be IGP and is actually IGCP, so that's not a typo. Okay, and then there's various Category 2 centers. These are research centers that are, said to be under the auspices of UNESCO, but not actual UNESCO programs. And one that I'm involved in has to do with karst. And then there's something called the Ramsar Convention on Wetlands, which was separate, but now is kind of tied to UNESCO. And there are, in fact, underground wetlands within the Ramsar program. So the way I want to do this is kind of go back through my sort of, last, 20 or 30 years, working on these UNESCO programs with the focus on China. Now, one thing I want to emphasize is this isn't about me or what I've done. This is about what I've seen and how it informs my thinking about these. But I'm sort of using, my lens, as the trajectory. So Guilin and the Lee River, now a World Heritage Site, is among the most iconic karst landscapes anywhere in the world. So my wife and I kind of made our way there in 1995. I had a chance to meet sort of two notable characters. One is this guy. I didn't meet him directly. He's been dead for a long time. But Shushaka. Shushaka is essentially, essentially the father of geography in China, one might say. He's kind of Alexander von Humboldt, Charles Darwin, Alfred North Wallace, just kind of wrapped up in one guy. And he was literally exploring and mapping caves in Southwest China in the 1640s. And so this is at the Institute of Karst Geology, where this was. The other one, and I'm happy to say one of my dear friends of my lifetime is Yuan Daoxian. And he is I sometimes overword the analogy to Yoda, but this is the towering figure of karst science in China. He's in his mid-90s now, still working. I hope to see him next week or the week after. And so he, when I went there in 1995, I was right out of school, so he had no idea, who I was. But I was definitely a fanboy, to have a chance to even to chat with Professor Yuan. And what happened is I gave a talk about stuff at Mammoth Cave, some chemistry stuff. And he invited me to his office and said, well, let's sit down and have some tea. And I was like, yeah, that's just incredible. And we talked for an hour and it was life-changing. And part of the lesson is you don't know what's going to happen in 5 minutes. And this was a case where I had no expectation. I hope to go back to China again, but I had no plans to. And we sat down and Professor Yuan said, well, the stuff that you're doing, this chemistry, is related to a UNESCO project that I direct through something called the International, at that time, the International Geological Correlation Program. And why don't you join us? Now, this trip, coming up next week will be my 43rd trip to China. And it was from that meeting. It was literally life-changing. So what is the IGCP? So it originally started as the International Geological Correlation Program. That's where the IGCP comes from. And what it was is just exactly this deal that I was talking about with UNESCO, having people understand one another better and the world around them, what the IGCP projects do. In fact, later they changed it to the International Geoscience Program, but in a UNESCO-esque kind of way. They kept the original initials because everyone was used to it. And so there's been 7 projects. Hopefully another one coming up before too long. But what these do is they get geologists working on or scientists working on a common theme. It could be karst. It could be snails during the Paleozoic era, whatever it is. And they get geologists from all over the world. They're not funding research, but what they're funding is, and it's not very much funding, but they're funding communication. So what we would do over the years is have, like at some conference, the International Association of Hydrogeologists or the, International Union of Geological Sciences, whatever big international conference was going on, then once a year, typically, we would have a business meeting of these various IGCP projects meet. And a lot of these were in the great karst areas of the world. And so we had, various field excursions, Vietnam, China, Switzerland, just all these wonderful places. And whenever you go there, it's the local experts that are the ones leading the field trips that are, essentially are the world experts on that zone. Now, really fundamental thing, that I learned from this process is, you go to a conference like that. This is what I mean about getting people in the same room at the same, proverbial cocktail parties. The communication happens when people are giving presentations about this research or that research, but where the relationships and the communication happens is on a field trip like this, or at a coffee break, two people sitting together that haven't met, that otherwise would never have gotten together, but they're there together for this common interest through the agency of UNESCO having created this, this world view. And it's like, oh yeah, we share this in common, or I know this guy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the infinite number of permutations of various people that have met, in this, in this process, not just this project, but through so many UNESCO projects, has led to just, an unimaginable amount of result of productivity. So what I want to do is just give a couple of examples of how this has played out, just, in my kind of bumbling pathway, where that to some degree, as I'll say, these UNESCO programs, both in the US and at UNESCO in Paris, tend to be kind of siloed. They tend to be compartmentalized. Here's World Heritage and here's the International Biosphere Reserve. Right? What I'd like to talk about is cross-fertilization that I've just seen just by pure chance from these programs. So I mentioned or actually. Yeah. So these, so the IGCP projects, went on for many years. This ultimately led to the development of in Guilin, at the same place. There's Chushaka, kind of look over everyone's shoulder there. That they UNESCO authorized or formed the International Research Center on Karst under the auspices of UNESCO. And what that organization does is a bunch of things, but probably the most impactful is that there's annual training courses. The Chinese government gets funding. This is not funded by UNESCO very much, but they bring 15 or 20 people from all over the world, every year when there's not a global pandemic, and then we did it through Zoom, but for annual training courses in China for 2 weeks or even more. And provide that training. Also provide lots and lots and lots of relationships. So I generally serve on the faculty of those, and the various students that I've met, are just people from karst areas all over the world. So the synergy has just been incredible. So for example, or I should say another part of the synergy is another thing that happened is along the way. So IRCK, the International Research Center on Karst, was formed in 2008. Around the same time, in 2007, the what's called the South China Karst World Heritage Site, was inscribed. This is what's called a serial site, which means there's different properties disconnected, like not contiguous properties, in 7 different provinces in China, each one of which has the world, sort of type examples of various different kinds of karst features. So there was 3 inscribed in 2007. A second phase came in later, and now there's 7 of them. That's where I'm heading the week after next. Is essentially the main part of the trip, and with students, is to strengthen the ties between Mammoth Cave and the South China Coast World Heritage Site. So we did form a sister park arrangement. This is Pat Reed, who was the superintendent at Mammoth Cave at that time. And then when we went over and signed the agreement, and this was the director of Shilin, the Stone Forest section. So with that, one of the sort of the tubes of glue, I guess, that sort of bind all this stuff together. It was through that process that I met Rudy D'Alessandro. He came to China with us, and Pat Reed, to sign the agreement in 2009. Rudy manages the World Heritage Program. He works with the National Park Service in Washington, manages the World Heritage Program for Russia, Asia, the Pacific, the Arctic, and I understand is adding Africa to his portfolio in his spare time coming up. So I really want to acknowledge, the relationships that really Rudy has made possible. Another person that's very much in this is Cliff McCready. All of you in the Biosphere Network, of course, know. And I'll just observe, and this is simply just the way it's played out, is that both Cliff and Rudy work on the same floor. They have cubby holes there. You could throw a potato from one to the other if the walls weren't there. And so, but it's a little bit, I don't know, funny with the word, is that Rudy works for the Office of International Affairs. And so here's, the World Heritage, here are these international programs run through the Park Service. Cliff works for the Natural Resource Stewardship and Science Directorate, if I have that right. And Rudy works for the Office of International Affairs, two separate programs. So we're kind of reporting somehow to both of them. And of course, they know each other and are friends, but programmatically they're in different programs. So here's an example of this kind of synergy. I'll give just a few of them. Okay, so here's Pat Mangan. Pat was essentially had Cliff McCready's job before Cliff. Pat was the one before that. So Pat calls up the superintendent at Mammoth Cave, maybe about 2018. And it was literally on like 9 o'clock in the morning on September 30th. And those of you in the government know what that means. He called the superintendent, and Pat said, in the Office of International Affairs, we have a few $1,000s left over. Is there something you all can do? And so Pat called me up and said, can we think of something? Can we get a proposal by the end of the day? And so, so we got it back. And what we did was we came up with an idea. I want to acknowledge John Putnam also here, because he managed a lot of this with great suffering and patience. But it turned out that Beth McClain is the superintendent of the Puerto Princesa World Heritage Site and Biosphere Reserve in the Philippines. She had been to Mammoth Cave the year before. So we said, well, why don't we use this funding where we'll go to the Philippines and give a workshop, essentially what my 19 friends and I are doing, and Leanne are doing right now, and have that kind of cooperation. Okay. Well, if you haven't heard, there was a global pandemic that kind of slowed that down. There was a typhoon that destroyed certain parts of the Philippines. So there was some delay. Years went by. We got extensions. John Putnam, which is wonderful. But we just weren't able to work it out with the Philippines. So almost when the last extension was getting ready to run out, I remember about the training courses, the RC training courses. Well, the one in 2001, I was a teacher. Anna Salas was one of the students from Mexico, very prominent, cave diver, archaeologist. So we met. It turns out that Mammoth Cave is the longest cave in the world. Where Anna are the second and fourth longest caves in the world. So when I met Anna, I said, man, we should chat. So one thing led to the other. We called John. And he said, yeah, let's use the funding, the funding we still had, a few $1,000s. So next thing, here's Anna, at Mammoth Cave, learning about the stuff that we're, talking about this week. And then shortly after, those of us from Mammoth Cave and WKU made our way down to Mexico to several biosphere reserves. This is continuing. Leanne and Pat Cambyses have gone back, and Leanne's actually taking a class of WKU students down there in January. So there's no telling where that would come up. The other one that I want to quickly mention, which I'm very excited about, here's Pat again. So one of the great gifts that Pat gave me and others is an introduction to Tom Gilbert. And many of you know Tom, he was on the talk 2 weeks ago. But anyway, I met Tom Gilbert, and Tom, he's been called the great connector. So related to this, and I'll come back to Tom in a second. So as I said, next week, I'm going with some students to China, again, to strengthen these relationships and see great karst landscapes. And I was talking to Tom about it, and he said, well, you should talk to, I'll just call him Ish, sort of what he goes by, who's, very much connected to all this. He used to be head of the environment and ecological section of UNESCO. And one thing led to the other. And, so Tom introduced me to Ishwaran. He introduced me to Wang Ding, who is the Secretary General of the China Man in the Biosphere Program. So what we worked out is we're passing through Beijing. The plane ticket's already paid for, by WKU. We're going there to do World Heritage stuff. but how about if we take a day, could we meet with the Chinese MAB group? Because there's not, a whole lot of communication, and they were great, come on by. So we'll be there in another week or two. So the synergy it's not costing anybody anything. It's simply taking what we're already doing and finding ways to get value out of that. So what I want to end with is a very specific another new initiative that my head's about to explode on this one. And that is, so when I was talking to Tom recently, Tom knows everything and everyone. He actually knows a guy that was at that meeting in 1945, or knew him. I don't know if the other guy is still living. But so I was talking to Tom about our trip, and he knew Ron Walker, who was head of the Park Service. And, back when Tom was head of education for the Park Service, Ron Walker had led the last advance trip to China for Richard Nixon's visit. And so Tom knows all about that. And he said, a really cool thing is when Nixon went to China, a gift that they took was a giant, actually several giant California redwoods that they took there to plant as a very long-term symbol of cooperation and peace. Literally, that was the word they used between the US and China. And for years, Tom had apparently wondering, like, what in the world happened to those trees, and like, how big are they and whatever. So anyway, so we're talking about it. A little bit of research, and I found out that this was on Twitter. This is all in the past 2 weeks. This is a tweet, or X, whatever they call them now, from the Consulate General for the Chinese consulate in China, and he just by pure chance happened to be post. Here is this tree that was planted by Richard Nixon, and look how big it is. He was just doing it. He's from Hangzhou. Hangzhou is where it is. I don't know what happened to the others yet, but he just posted, because this is just a wonderful thing, and he's proud of it. And I saw this, and I thought, well, there it is. It turns out, and I'll end with the fact that this tree is in the same town. In fact, it's a World Heritage Site there also, where next year's once every 10-year in World Congress of Biosphere Reserves is going to be. And so, I don't know exactly where that's leading, but it seems to me that, this is not only a symbol of sort of US-China friendship that's happening, but this tree is now 50 years old. If you think of that in terms of how redwood trees get, this is a teenager. What a symbol for youth engagement for UNESCO. So anyway, so those that end up going to the Congress, I think somehow we need to just bring attention to this tree, which is just across the road apparently. So anyway, with that, what I'll say is, the 12 of us are actually plus 19 here who are here together. What are we doing? Okay, we're understanding one another and the world around us. This is what UNESCO is about. So anyway, thank you. And I think I have maybe 3 minutes for questions, so I'll take some quick ones. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thanks so much, Chris. What a wonderful full circle moment, especially following up from the previous Biosphere Bites with Tom. I will open it up to questions if anyone has them.
I'll go. Thanks, Katie. Chris, this was an excellent presentation. And I think to the title of your presentation really speaks about science diplomacy and the value of the Biosphere Program. So thank you again for presenting this. And as you know, I'm always inspired by your work with China. So I'm just curious. I know when I was in China for the first time, unlike you, I've only been once, but it seemed like there was some interest from the Chinese side in terms of having exchanges. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about your experience of if there might be an opportunity for the US Biosphere Network and or the Canadian Biosphere Reserve Association. I know we have some partners on the call to facilitate maybe some research exchanges or youth exchanges and what that could look like.
Absolutely. And in fact, I'll just say, and this is sort of way in the back of my mind, I have a fantasy of a pre or post Congress, the Hangzhou meeting to the South China Karst World Heritage Sites. Let's spend a week and go look at some of the greatest karst landscapes in the world. So this is very doable.
Yes, please.
I mean that's just one example. But what I will tell you is something that very much informs your experience in China, but it won't be obvious to you. is that you're there right after the pandemic, just when things are opening up, when the relations between the U.S. and China are literally at their low point. I mean, a colleague in the State Department that I know used that exact term. So things, the China you experienced is in many ways different in some ways, to what it was, over all these years, and it's recovering, and but the the relations between Beijing and Washington. One thing that's great about these programs is it's up and down and up and down and up and down. These person-to-person contacts, what I call scientific diplomacy. In fact, my same State Department colleague, he said this is the ballast in the U.S.-China relationship. Whichever way the winds are blowing high up, we are steadfast. We just do this stuff. So there is any number. There's no limit on the possibilities for exchanges. It's just the creativity to, the relationships are there. It's basically just the funding, just to find somebody to buy the plane tickets. But absolutely, and I'm happy to, to facilitate, any of that. Yeah, but let's go see some caves before after the Congress. So.
That's great. Thanks, Chris. And I hope they can come here too, to the US and potentially to Canada. So that's great. Yeah. Thank you again for the great presentation.
Yeah, our Chinese colleagues have been here to Mammoth Cave, number of times. Yeah, great.
Well, we are at 12:30. Our next Biosphere Bite will be on June 5th and feature a presentation from John Dennis about the periodic reviews and the importance of those. I will keep the meeting going for another 2 minutes if anyone has any last minute questions for Chris, but
that's I feel very privileged. Thank you so much. I know
if folks have to sign off though, please feel free.
Anybody got a 2-minute question?
Well, this is John Allen. It may not be a 2-minute answer, but the 30-second or 20-second question is, how do we make sure that more of this happens? You've highlighted a series of relationships and a series of circumstances. And my question is, how do we make sure that there are more circumstances and situations where we can continue to grow these relationships?
That's an excellent question, and in fact, I probably should have sort of ended up, because I've identified, not the problem, but the benefits of this, these kinds of interactions, and I'll say it's happening. I had a sign up there that pointed out that for years we've emailed Cliff. One thing is, I say we. I'm not a employee of the Park Service. I'm a partner, but we're just all in this. But we email Cliff about this thing, or email Rudy about that thing. But these are the international programs of Mammoth Cave National Park. So now the thing that's happening is because this trip coming up involves both World Heritage and now Man in the Biosphere Reserve, Cliff and we're all in the same emails now. Instead of email that office and email that office. So what we need to do is that's so perfect, John. Thank you. Is we need to look for these relationships. The compartmentalization is just a structure. It's not it's not that it's good or bad. But so how do we do this? One thing I'm thinking. And Sarah Gaines really would be the one to talk to, but maybe at some conferences, or let's say in Hangzhou, at the Congress, we have a session that's not just MAB, but we invite people from World Heritage, Geoparks. There's lots of Geoparks in China, to say, if you're working with UNESCO, let's have a session. Just come talk about whatever it is and have that synergy. There's the whole other geoheritage community that the Sarah, people from USGS, National Science Foundation, National Academy of Sciences. So there's all these people, and we just have to really nurture ways to communicate. So maybe sessions at meetings. So it's really just looking for those ways to communicate. The way that I've been talking about here, that was just happenstance. We just happened to kind of cross paths. But I think let's go ahead and be more proactive about looking for those opportunities. It's doable. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
I guess that's our 2 minutes. So thank you for the
yeah, well, I'm going to break my own rule and ask a follow-up question on that. I am curious, after you make these initial connections, how do you keep them going when you're not in this space together physically anymore?
That's another good question. So there's a not exactly applicable cliche, and that's you have to kiss a lot of frogs. And the idea is you just sort of do the best you can. Some work out and some don't. We have a lot of things happen, and you just never see one another again. So it really just takes there's not a real answer to that. What I guess somehow I'm thinking, those of us that are on this call are, none of us are getting paid by the hour to be on this call. We're on this call because we're enthusiastic about what we're doing. There's some opportunity. So whatever it is that's kind of driving, just the fact that you invented Biosphere Bites, and that, thank you very much for that. But whatever that energy, whatever that motivation is, you just have to find people that have that. And when two groups get together, so it's just communication. One thing that is a great resource is when I started working in China, there was no internet. It took 10 days to get to a letter, to get a letter to China. So when you were planning a trip, you'd send a letter. It would take 10 days. If they mailed a letter the next day, it was 10 days to get back. So we had 3 weeks just to say hello to one another. And now, I get up in the morning and there's 3 emails from China, from that night. So it's very, very easy. So it just really takes first the initiative, and then really just the communication and money for plane tickets. That's the other thing with any international programs. And so that's one of the limiting factors. But you put a little bit from here, a little bit from there. Our trip coming up next week, is put together by a number of, different programs at WKU. It's just, me and 2 students. But it's not all that expensive, to do things, it's not like hundreds of thousands of dollars. Yeah. But it's just that, whatever that place is in our hearts, that drives all this. It's really just kind of nurturing that, I think. Yeah. Great. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah. And I put it in the chat, but big shout out to Kelly for her work with the International Network and the Austrian program that was doing a similar lunch and learn. So again, another example of how we learn from our participation in these UNESCO programs in the World Network and can apply it here. So I think great presentation, Chris. Really you've generated a lot of energy around this. And again, I'm sad these are 30 minutes, but looking forward to keeping the conversation going. Hope to see everyone at a future Biosphere Bite. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Katie. Great. All right. Take it easy. Bye-bye, everyone. Yeah, feel free to email. You know where I live. So see you later.
Great. Thanks all.
Yep.